Overseas crime gangs have their eyes on Australia's real estate wealth, divorce settlements and retirement savings. They use digital bank robbery to steal our money while conveniently laundering it through electronic payment platforms. Next time you see a billboard promising banks keep your money safe, think about what you're about to hear.
This has become the most profitable crime on earth because it's such a high profit crime and such a low risk.
Hassan Mehdi and his mate Muhammad Ali Waheed crafted a web of lies to trick NAB into opening a Mule business bank account to steal money. Their account scammed at least 12 Australians out of more than $1.3 million in June 2022. Its name? Supercheap Security. Ironic because it exposes exactly how poor the security is across Australia's digital economy. Fake websites, sham businesses, sock puppet social media profiles and mule bank accounts don't only trick scam victims, they're fooling our banks and regulators too. We dive into a New South Wales Supreme Court case in the name of O'Brien versus Supercheap Security to reveal how digital bank robbery opens a Pandora's box of deceit and mistrust. Sure, everyone blames scam victims for being duped, but when regulators and banks are also deceived, who should pay the price? This legal case reveals the Herculean power that overseas crime gangs have over Australian law and banking processes. I'm Alex Brooks. This is episode 5 of Daylight Robbery. If what you're about to hear doesn't scare you, it should. In the middle of Melbourne's COVID-19 lockdowns, Mark Uytendaal felt lucky to sell up in the city and escape to the peace of a tiny town in the bush. He wanted a simpler life and to take time to clear the bush block he'd bought, which was covered in blackberries and wrecked cars. This former commercial fisherman wanted to build a duplex on his peaceful block so his mum could live next door.
It was Dad's idea too, because Dad was 16 years older than Mum and his health wasn't the greatest and he knew that his time was coming and all that sort of thing. And so we were going to invest like $100,000 each, or a bit more, and build like a little dual occupancy, share the kitchen and all that sort of thing, and have two like separate living areas so that I could look after Mum.
Mark's mum, Kerry, did some research online to find a term deposit. Before long, those men with British accents phoned her to help her set up a scam term deposit that was actually enriching Supercheap Security's NAB account, not AMP Bank's.
I'd recommended to Mark, AMP is safe, and he's very, very careful with the money that he had because he'd sold his house and he was going to start building his own house.
And of course, Mark wishes he'd listened to his inner skeptic. Mother and son were hoodwinked by NAB's Supercheap Security account. And there was nothing cheap about the $1.36 million Supercheap Security stole. The victims take the financial hit, even though ASIC legitimately registered the fake company, and criminals sold the NAB passcodes and logins for the Mule account to a shady Dubai-based character named Usman.
That's all my life savings gone.
The temporary shed is now Mark's permanent home. It doesn't even have a flushing toilet. It's not even the financial loss that's been the hardest.
The mental health side of things.
The what-ifs, the sleepless nights, worrying about money, the anger, the paranoia, and the hastening of his dad's death didn't help.
Even though that his body was starting to fail him, I really think it sped his death up through the stress.
Mark's own stress also skyrocketed. His mum, Kerry, blames herself. She had been logging into what she thought was the AMP website to check her money, and everything appeared fine. But that AMP website was fake, as was the interest rate comparison website she'd given her details to.
When I realised I was scammed,
Anger.
I think the feeling in my heart, you felt sick. You just felt sick. No, it couldn't be true. And my husband was not very well. And I hated saying it to him because it wasn't helping his health.
Mark and his mum Kerry would never have known they'd been scammed if a total stranger named Joe O'Brien hadn't messaged Mark on Facebook to let him know the AMP term deposit was really a scam. Former ASIO and New South Wales Police investigator Dan Halpin says plenty of Australians who have opened fake term deposits or investment accounts never find out they've been scammed until a year or more after their money's gone.
Sometimes we get victims contacting us a year later, and even the website itself or the trading platform itself has been shut down, and they're still thinking, okay, well, what's going on with my investment? They'll contact us, and that's when they hear the bad news that we're aware of this scam and the money's gone, basically.
Australian banks are under no obligation to let victims know they've been scammed, even if another customer has alerted them about it. What's more, the banks write letters to scam victims saying they have no obligation to maintain watching briefs for scams for their customers' benefit. Nor do the banks claim they owe a fiduciary duty to their customers. That's fancy legal talk for taking care not to lose their customers' life savings. Basically, there are no consumer protections for bank customers transferring money online in Australia.
A lot of the times, people don't actually know they've been scammed till very late in the piece. So I know people who lost their money in a fake superannuation fund. They had lost their money when they put the money in the fake superannuation fund when they were 40. They didn't work out that they'd lost their money till they were 55. They kept getting fake statements. They kept putting more contributions in, and it all disappeared. That's brutal. It's utterly brutal. These were people who didn't have a lot of money.
That's John Hempton, Australia's Bronte Capital founder, who specialises in finding fraudulent companies to short sell.
The crime in financial markets is pretty pervasive.
And it has been, that's not new, right?
That's not new, but there are tools that have made it better.
A tornado of technology has spun our electronic payment system out of control, and banks, regulators and scam victims are all trapped by the consequences. Artificial intelligence makes it faster, easier and cheaper to steal identity documents and run call centres from third world countries where men with British accents commit digital bank robbery. These fraudsters simply buy ads on Facebook, Instagram or Google if they need to scale up their bank robbery to hook more people in. The fake AMP term deposit that trapped Mark and Kerry used a website called Money Smart Investments AU, looking remarkably like ASIC's Money Smart website, to recruit people into the scam.
It was only 3% for 1 year, so that was all that I wanted to be. And of course, I'd recommended to Mark, AMP is safe, you know.
Those British men, likely calling from a call centre in another part of the world, naturally needed copies of Mark and Kerry's identity documents to set up the term deposit. These all-important identity documents are then on-sold on the black market to the highest bidder for other frauds and scams. And none of these crimes work without an Australian Mule bank account to accept stolen funds.
The things that go on at the bank are just so wrong. Like, my name didn't match the account.
That's Jo O'Brien, the woman who told Mark and Kerry they'd fallen victim to the same scam she did. Jo took the unprecedented step of suing NAB for allowing fraudsters to open the fake account impersonating AMP. Scam victims rarely sue banks. It costs around $30,000 in legal costs to even think about court action. But Jo rallied other victims like Mark and Kerry to share those initial legal costs, until NAB's lawyers began throwing their weight around.
The bank threatened to counter-sue us $150,000 each or some stupid thing for their legal fees. And that was basically it.
We had to drop out. We put a certain amount in, but it ended up that we would have ended up losing our house and he would have lost his land if we'd have kept on going. So we had to pull out.
I was told by the NAB if I didn't pull out of the proceedings that they were prepared to take this all the way to the High Court and spend up to $1.5 million rather than pay me back $500,000. So what does that tell you? They are desperate to keep winning and bullying, and you can't fight City Hall. That's how it feels.
Banks don't want legal cases that set a precedent that would allow victims to be reimbursed. It would simply be too costly for them. Australians have reported around $9 billion lost to fraud and scams in the last 3 years. And that's why the Australian Financial Complaints Authority is so important to conciliate justice for scam victims. It's free for victims to make a complaint to AFCA. It's just extremely rare for AFCA to reimburse fraud victims. Those expensive bank lawyers don't just intimidate victims like Joe, Mark and Kerry when they go to court. They probably do the same to AFCA. Expert cybercrime witness Simon Smith, who has represented people at AFCA and only ever successfully negotiated settlements outside the AFCA process, says justice is extremely hard for fraud and scam victims in Australia.
It's very rare. In fact, I haven't known any self-represented person to actually win an AFCA case, personally.
In countries like Britain, banks have mandatory reimbursement schemes for authorised push payment frauds like Mark, Kerry and Joe suffered. Both sending and receiving banks split the costs and then work out liability later on, making sure the victim gets their money back quickly.
A really good friend of mine recently told me that a friend of hers bought a house in England and got sent a link to pay her deposit, which was £300,000. She clicked on the link. She paid the money. Of course, it was a scam. Within 2 weeks, she had all her money back from the bank. And here I am 2 years later.
Joe has not received 1 cent of reimbursement. Neither has Mark or Kerry. Australian banks and our government are violently opposed to a mandatory reimbursement model, claiming it will make Australia a honeypot for scammers. But we do already lose more money per head than Britain.
So with the British model, one genuine concern is that it's just making a lot more money available because scammers can target people without needing to feel guilty about what they're doing because they know that the banks who make these massive profits will just reimburse the victim. And that's just a massive cycle that goes round and round.
There are no easy answers to solving transnational digital bank robbery. Even the United Nations is trying to stop organised financial fraud, but no country can agree what it might look like. Meanwhile, the criminals get richer by laundering money that ends up in the hands of bad state actors like Russia, North Korea, Iran or China. These countries use this money to fund crime, buy weapons, create more terrorism and worse. Britain's National Crime Agency says financial crime and money laundering threatens national security and the country's prosperity. But in 2023, Australia had more than twice as much of its economic GDP reported as scam losses than Britain. And our government hasn't said a thing. Now, one thing the AFCA process obliges Australian banks to do is attempt to recall or recover scammed funds. But Simon says the banks only have to show AFCA they tried to recall scam funds, maybe once.
AFCA knows that there's no golden rule, there's no law. They only have to just try once for AFCA and AFCA ticks the box. That's it.
Simon says if victims negotiate with banks outside of AFCA and press the banks about recovering scammed money, more money sometimes magically is reimbursed.
The banks aren't very good either because they are technically money laundering by allowing their customers to open accounts. But when it comes to the crunch and the police get the warrant on them, it doesn't really go anywhere.
Joe, Mark and Kerry's money was sent offshore to be laundered by NAB. This happened at a time that AUSTRAC forced NAB into what's called an enforceable undertaking to stop their money laundering. Yet the Supreme Court documents show the day after Joe, Mark and Kerry transferred more than $300,000, more than $500,000 was transferred from super cheap security to British and Middle Eastern companies.
Go and try and take 5 or 10,000 out of your bank without getting hounded by the tellers or whatever, but then they can just transfer 200,000-300,000 to an offshore account without even blinking about it. It's just mind-boggling what they've done.
The toll on the victim's health is more extreme than most people can imagine.
I have panic attacks. I have constant anxiety. I've been diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, major depression. I'm on medication. I would sleep all day if I could.
The rollercoaster of trying to find justice through the police, the Supreme Court, or AFCA has possibly been harder than losing the money.
If I got my money back tomorrow, all of my mental health problems would be gone and Joe would be back. That's how I feel.
Now, Joe actually did win the Supreme Court case, which we will talk about more in episode 6, but she won't get any money until she bankrupts Super Cheap Security Director Hassan Mehdi, which could take years.
The banks win, AFCA wins, everyone else wins, and no one takes responsibility, and it's just a big blame game. It's a bullying game, and innocent people like me don't have the money to follow through.
Global law firm Herbert Smith Freehills acted for NAB in Joe's New South Wales Supreme Court case. They used legal tactics similar to those of the Catholic Church in historic sex abuse cases. When they asked to be struck from or have proceedings dismissed with consent orders, NAB's lawyers effectively shielded the bank from giving any public details about its role in the fake AMP term deposit sting and the money laundering. Then, those lawyers bragged about it on LinkedIn, just as good corporate lawyers endorsed for white-collar crime should do. In the next episode of Daylight Robbery, you'll see Mehdi and Waheed's bizarre media appearance on the ABC about the super cheap security scam. You'll also see why criminals win in our courts and how regulators, banks and governments leave people with the least power to bear all the costs.